Final days on Texas death row. Every year in the United States, a small number of prisoners walk their final steps inside a prison. For many of them, that journey ends in Texas. Inside a facility surrounded by razor wire and armed guard towers, men sit alone in concrete cells waiting for a date that will decide the final hours of their lives. They are on Texas death row. For decades, Texas has carried out more executions than any other state in America. Since the modern death penalty resumed in the United States in 1976, hundreds of inmates have been executed by the state of Texas, far more than any other jurisdiction. But what actually happens in the final days before an execution? What does a condemned inmate experience in the last week, the last day, and the last minutes before the state carries out a death sentence? The reality is quieter than many people imagine. There are no dramatic countdown clocks. No chaotic final moments. Instead, there is a strict routine, governed by policy, law, and a system designed to carry out a court-ordered punishment with precision. Tonight, we follow the final days on Texas death row.
Before we dive into today's powerful story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales. Your support helps us keep sharing these stories, and we wouldn't want you to miss any of the action. Now, let's get started.
Where Texas death row is located. Texas death row is located inside the Allan B. Polunsky Unit, a maximum security prison in Livingston, Texas. The facility opened in 1999 and replaced an older death row unit in Huntsville. Before that year, male death sentence prisoners were held at the Ellis Unit. But security concerns, including a dramatic escape in 1998, led officials to move all male death row inmates to the Polunsky Unit. Today, nearly every man sentenced to death in Texas is housed here. Inside this facility, the condemned live under some of the strictest prison conditions in the United States. Inmates on Texas death row are kept in single-occupancy cells, separated from the general prison population. The housing area is known as administrative segregation, often called simply ad-seg. These cells measure roughly 60 square feet, small spaces containing a concrete bed, a steel sink, and a toilet. Unlike many other prison units, death row inmates in Texas do not live in shared dormitories or cell blocks. Instead, they spend most of their time alone. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice states that these restrictions exist for safety reasons. Many inmates on death row have been convicted of violent crimes, and prison officials consider them high-risk prisoners. But the result is a life defined by isolation. Daily life on death row. For prisoners on Texas death row, daily life follows a highly structured routine. Most inmates spend 22 to 23 hours per day inside their cells. Meals are delivered through a slot in the steel door. 3 times a week, inmates are allowed a brief shower under guard supervision. Recreation time is also limited. Instead of open prison yards, death row prisoners exercise alone in small outdoor cages, sometimes referred to as recreation pens. These enclosures are surrounded by chain-link fencing and razor wire. They are designed so that inmates cannot come into contact with one another. Communication between prisoners often happens by shouting between cells or passing written messages through the ventilation system. In interviews and court filings, several former death row inmates have described the experience as psychologically difficult. But prison officials say the restrictions are necessary to prevent violence, escape attempts, and attacks on staff. And for most prisoners, this routine continues for years. Sometimes decades. How long prisoners stay on death row? Despite what many people assume, executions in the United States rarely happen quickly after sentencing. In Texas, the legal process often lasts for many years. Once a person is sentenced to death, the case enters a long series of automatic appeals. These appeals examine whether the trial followed constitutional rules and whether the conviction was legally sound. According to data compiled by the Death Penalty Information Center, the average time between sentencing and execution in the United States is more than 18 years. Some inmates remain on death row far longer. During that time, lawyers may challenge evidence, raise claims of ineffective counsel, or argue that new information has emerged. Courts can also delay executions if new legal issues appear. As a result, many prisoners on Texas death row spend decades waiting for their case to reach its final legal conclusion. But eventually, for some inmates, the appeals process ends. And when it does, the state schedules an execution date. The execution date. The final stage begins when the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals sets an official execution date. Once the date is scheduled, the countdown begins. By law, executions in Texas are typically scheduled for 6 p.m. on the chosen day. In the weeks leading up to that date, legal teams often continue filing last-minute appeals. These filings may go to state courts, federal courts, or even the United States Supreme Court. Sometimes those appeals succeed. An execution may be delayed or stopped entirely. But in many cases, the courts deny the requests. When that happens, the scheduled execution moves forward. For the prisoner, the reality of the situation becomes unavoidable. The final days have begun. Transfer to the death watch cell. About 72 hours before the scheduled execution, the inmate is moved to a special area known as death watch. This section is located inside the Huntsville Unit, roughly an hour south of the Polunsky Unit. The Huntsville Unit is home to the Texas execution chamber. By transferring the prisoner here in advance, officials ensure that the execution process can proceed smoothly if the courts allow it. In death watch, the prisoner is monitored around the clock. 2 correctional officers remain stationed nearby at all times. Their job is to observe the inmate continuously and ensure the prisoner does not attempt self-harm. Every movement is recorded. Every moment documented. The final countdown has officially begun. Isolation before the end. The death watch cell is stark, even by prison standards. It contains only the basic necessities. A metal bed. A sink. A toilet. Bright lights remain on almost constantly. Correctional officers observe the inmate through the cell window and by camera. The goal is to prevent any incident that might disrupt the execution process. For the prisoner, the environment can feel even more isolating than death row itself. But during these final hours, there are also a few additional privileges. The condemned inmate is allowed visits from attorneys, religious advisors, and immediate family members. These visits may last several hours. In some cases, they become the final opportunity for loved ones to speak face-to-face. Final days on Texas death row. The last 24 hours. The morning of an execution day begins quietly inside the Huntsville Unit. There are no announcements over loudspeakers. No public countdown. But everyone inside the prison understands what day it is. Correctional officers assigned to death watch follow a detailed protocol created by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, often called TDCJ. Every action throughout the day must follow strict procedures. The inmate is monitored continuously. 2 officers remain posted outside the cell at all times. Their responsibility is simple but critical: ensure the prisoner remains safe and accounted for until the execution order is carried out. Inside the cell, the prisoner may spend the morning reading, writing letters, praying, or speaking with spiritual advisors. Many inmates request visits from clergy. Texas prison policy allows religious advisors to visit during these final hours. For some prisoners, these conversations last most of the day. Final legal appeals. Even on the day of an execution, the legal process may still be unfolding. Attorneys representing the condemned inmate often file last-minute appeals. These legal challenges can reach multiple courts in a matter of hours. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, federal district courts, and sometimes the United States Supreme Court may all review emergency motions. These filings often raise questions about newly discovered evidence, claims of constitutional violations, mental competency, the legality of the execution method. In some cases, these appeals result in a temporary stay of execution. A stay halts the execution while courts review new arguments. But such decisions are relatively rare. According to data from the Death Penalty Information Center, most scheduled executions in Texas proceed as planned once the final appeals are exhausted. For prison officials, the uncertainty means preparations must continue while the courts deliberate. Family visits. One of the most significant moments in the final day often comes during family visitation. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice allows condemned prisoners to receive visits from close relatives before the execution. These visits usually take place inside a secure visitation room. Communication happens through glass partitions and telephone handsets. Family members may travel long distances to attend. Some come from other states. Others have not seen the prisoner in years. The conversations are private. Prison staff remain nearby, but they do not listen to the details of what is said. For many families, this becomes the final opportunity to say goodbye. Spiritual advisors. Religion plays an important role during many executions in Texas. Inmates are allowed to meet with spiritual advisors, including prison chaplains or clergy from their own religious tradition. These advisors may pray with the inmate, read scripture, or offer counseling during the final hours. For decades, Texas permitted a prison chaplain to accompany the prisoner into the execution chamber. However, legal challenges in recent years raised questions about whether inmates should be allowed advisors from other faith traditions. In response, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice revised its policy. Today, spiritual advisors selected by the inmate may be present inside the execution chamber, subject to security rules. Their role is typically limited to quiet prayer or spiritual support. The last meal. For many years, Texas allowed condemned inmates to request a special last meal. The tradition attracted public attention because some prisoners asked for elaborate or unusual meals. But in 2011, Texas ended the practice. The decision came after an inmate named Lawrence Russell Brewer, convicted in a racially motivated murder, requested an unusually large last meal but reportedly refused to eat it. Following the incident, state officials announced that special last meal requests would no longer be granted. Today, prisoners scheduled for execution receive the same meal served to other inmates in the prison. There are no special menu choices. No customized requests. The policy change was confirmed by the Texas Senate and implemented by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Preparing the execution chamber. While the inmate spends the day in death watch, preparations are underway elsewhere inside the Huntsville Unit. Texas executions are carried out by lethal injection. The procedure takes place in a small room known as the execution chamber. Inside the chamber is a padded gurney where the prisoner will be restrained. Adjacent to the chamber is a separate viewing room. This area allows selected witnesses to observe the execution. Witnesses usually include family members of the victim, family members of the condemned inmate, journalists, official representatives of the state. Prison officials check all equipment carefully before the scheduled execution time. The process must follow strict guidelines established by state law and prison protocol. Witness arrivals. As the afternoon moves toward evening, witnesses begin arriving at the prison. Executions in Texas are typically scheduled for 6 p.m. Witnesses are processed through security and escorted to designated waiting areas inside the prison. Journalists who attend executions are selected in advance through a rotating system. They represent major news organizations and are responsible for documenting the event for the public. Meanwhile, family members of the victim and the inmate are escorted to separate witness rooms. They will not see each other during the process. Each group waits quietly as the final preparations continue. The final hour. As the execution hour approaches, the atmosphere inside the Huntsville Unit becomes increasingly tense. Prison officials remain in contact with the courts. Even in the final hour, a judge may issue a stay of execution. If that happens, the process stops immediately. But if no court intervenes, the execution proceeds according to schedule. Shortly before the appointed time, correctional officers enter the death watch area. They inform the inmate that it is time. The prisoner is escorted from the cell. For the first time since arriving at the Huntsville Unit days earlier, the inmate leaves the death watch corridor. The next steps will lead directly to the execution chamber. Inside the execution chamber. The final walk. Shortly before the scheduled execution time, correctional officers escort the condemned inmate from the death watch cell. This short walk is sometimes called the final walk. It usually takes place through a secured hallway inside the Huntsville Unit. The distance is not long, but it represents the final movement of the inmate through the prison. According to witnesses and former prison officials, the walk is conducted calmly and without unnecessary force. The inmate's hands are restrained. Correctional officers remain on both sides. At the end of the hallway is the execution chamber. A room that has carried out hundreds of executions since Texas adopted lethal injection in the early 1980s. Entering the execution chamber. Inside the chamber is a padded gurney positioned beneath bright lights. The room is small and quiet. The inmate is guided onto the gurney and secured with straps. These restraints are placed across the arms, chest, waist, and legs. Medical personnel then prepare the intravenous lines that will be used during the execution. In Texas, lethal injection currently involves a single drug, pentobarbital. The medication is a powerful barbiturate used medically to induce deep sedation. According to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, the drug is intended to render the inmate unconscious before death occurs. Once the 4 lines are secured, the curtain separating the chamber from the witness room remains closed while officials complete the final checks. The witness rooms. On the other side of the chamber are the witness rooms. Texas uses 2 separate viewing areas. One room is reserved for the victim's family and representatives of the state. The other room is for the inmate's family members and spiritual advisors. A third area accommodates journalists who are present to document the execution. Witnesses sit in rows of chairs facing a large glass window. Through that window, they can see the execution chamber. Until the process begins, the curtain covering the glass remains closed. Witnesses often wait quietly. Some pray. Others sit silently. For many of them, the next few minutes will be among the most difficult moments they will ever experience. The final statement. Before the execution begins, Texas law allows the condemned inmate to make a final statement. A microphone is positioned near the gurney so the inmate can speak. These final statements vary widely. Some inmates offer apologies to the victims' families. Others speak to their own relatives in the witness room. Some express religious beliefs or prayers. And in some cases, inmates choose not to speak at all. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice records these statements and later publishes them on its official website. They become part of the public record documenting the execution. The execution order. Once the final statement is complete, the execution order is confirmed. A prison official signals that the process will begin. Behind the chamber wall is a separate control room. Inside that room are correctional staff responsible for administering the lethal injection. The 4-line running from the inmate's arm connects to equipment in the control room. This design allows the procedure to take place without additional personnel entering the chamber. When the order is given, the lethal injection begins. Lethal injection. Texas currently uses a single-drug lethal injection protocol. The drug used is pentobarbital, a barbiturate that depresses the central nervous system. Once the drug enters the bloodstream, it is intended to cause rapid unconsciousness. Witnesses have reported that the inmate typically loses consciousness within a short period of time. Medical personnel then monitor the inmate's condition. After several minutes, a physician or designated official enters the chamber to check for signs of life. When no heartbeat or breathing is detected, the prisoner is pronounced dead. The official time of death is recorded. Witness reactions. After the execution is completed, the curtain is closed again. Witnesses remain seated briefly as prison officials confirm that the process is finished. For the families present, emotions can be complex and deeply personal. Some express a sense of closure. Others describe feelings of sadness or relief. Journalists who attend executions often write detailed reports documenting what they observed. These reports form part of the public record surrounding capital punishment in the United States. Official confirmation. Shortly after the execution, a prison spokesperson addresses reporters gathered outside the Huntsville Unit. The spokesperson confirms the inmate's name, the crime for which they were convicted, the official time of death, any final statement made by the inmate. The information is also released through official statements from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. In most cases, journalists publish detailed reports within hours. These reports ensure that the execution process remains part of the public record. If there's one thing the final hours on Texas death row reveal, it's how structured and documented the process truly is. Every step, from the final appeals to the last statement, follows procedures built through decades of law, court rulings, and prison policy. For some families, these moments bring a sense of closure. For others, they reopen painful memories that may never fully fade. And across the United States, the debate over capital punishment continues in courtrooms, legislatures, and communities. This documentary was created to examine the facts and the real procedures behind one of the most serious powers a government can exercise, the power to take a life under the law. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing for more fact-based crime and prison investigations. And until the next story, remember, behind every case file is a real story, and the truth is often more complex than it first appears.